Mental health experts say caseloads are exploding, waiting lists for their expertise is growing, and anxiety and depression in the coronavirus crisis is rising at an alarming rate. Today, how case managers at the Jefferson Center are coping, what they see in the weeks ahead. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the conversation. Once again, we are assembling a broadcast from outside of our studio as we continue to deal with the coronavirus. Our community and the country continues to deal with the coronavirus. And today, most specifically, we're looking at how the pandemic is affecting our mental health. Some of the statistics, I think, will surprise you. The latest information actually somewhat alarming, with fully half of U.S. adults surveyed suffering at least some signs of depression. So we went out and we rounded up some great experts today from the Jefferson Center, an agency that deals with our mental health, an agency that is trying to keep us all healthy and work our way through this as we march toward a vaccine. So let me introduce our guest today. First, Dr. Kiara Kunzler, who is the president and CEO at Jefferson Center, and she's managing a staff of more than 600 people, which is just remarkable. I mean, fortunately, we have all these experts, but that is a lot of folks for a CEO to take care of and to organize and supervise. Nick Buchholz is an intensive family services manager, and he has a lot of experience with college kids who are dealing with a lot of issues right now. We're anxious to talk to Nick about that. And Heather Trish, who is the Director of Trauma Services and Cultural Relevance. She's also a health equity specialist and a social justice expert, which are big topics on everybody's menu right now. I'd like to say to all of you, I know you're all just swamped, particularly when we start to go through some of these statistics. I know how swamped you are, so thank you all for your time this morning. So let's begin with some of the new research on what's going on in the country, which quite frankly was fairly astonishing. This is a study out of Boston University, and they've discovered that half of U.S. adults, half of the adults in our country, are reporting some signs of depression, such as hopefulness, feeling like a failure, and getting little pleasure from doing anything. I just found that just quite frankly astonishing, and I don't think it's been widely reported. So Kiara, I'd like to start with you. Is your agency seeing those figures? Do you agree with that assessment of the country currently?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thank you for covering this very important topic. I think it's on everyone's mind right now. Normally we see about 1 in 5 people within a given year struggling with a mental health disorder. Right now, as you mentioned, I think that number is much, much higher. And when you think about the things that typically contribute to depression, to feeling hopeless, they're major life transitions and loss. So things like losing a loved one, which many people are experiencing right now. You think about losing your job. You think about difficulties in relationships. Those are all pretty strong risk factors for depression, and we're seeing that across the country in much, much larger numbers. So at Jefferson Center...
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go right ahead. Go ahead.
Just at Jefferson Center, we certainly are seeing a lot more people call needing extra support who maybe have never reached out for mental health treatment before.
That was the question I was trying to jump in with, and I'm sorry. Sometimes it's hard to see everybody's face, and no one knows when someone else is going to talk. Part of the perils of doing everything from home. But I did want to ask you, with this massive staff that you have, these figures would indicate that you are very busy. In fact, that a lot of your professionals are swamped.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We're getting calls from a lot of, the people that are calling in the most right now are people that are really struggling with meeting their basic needs. So folks that have recently become unemployed, struggling with finances, have maybe struggled with paying their rent, and are looking for resources like support for housing, support for childcare, assistance for utilities, those kinds of things. And we're also seeing a lot of families struggling right now with an incredible amount of stress as families are dealing with remote learning for their children, on top of financial, employment, social isolation that we're all dealing with right now. So we're getting a lot of calls. And the people that are calling in usually are people that have gone without mental health services for quite a while. And by the time that they get to us, they need quite a bit of support. and are in more acute situations.
It's fascinating. And I want to ask Nick about the children. I told Nick just before we went on the air here this morning that I have a neighborhood that is literally full of college-age children, mostly younger, freshmen and sophomore, early college, or kids on the brink of college. And Nick, I know so many parents whose children are really struggling in this environment.
Yeah, absolutely. The current climate that we're in really is unprecedented. You know, the standard, I guess, was to complete high school, go to college, maybe live in a dorm. Now those things aren't happening. We have to really reimagine what that college experience would look like for those kids. You know, Kiara mentioned before too, even amongst high schoolers, a lot of them did not have a standard graduation. That's kind of a landmark for a lot of kids. And so it's a big struggle, you know, with that age group. There's a lot of pressure to socialize, to get out there, to make meaningful relationships that are really stymied by the world we're in right now. You know, we have to social distance. We have to do a lot of things through telehealth for our clinicians. You know, a lot of our appointments are through that means. It's less personal, and it's the best that we can do. So for kids in particular, you know, they want to go hang out with friends, and that's not possible. So parents, you know, are having their kids at home more, trying to navigate all those things. College kids are wanting to get out into the world, and they're really held back a little bit with what's going on. So,
yeah. I was going to say I have a park near my home, and every night there's probably 50 or 60 young people down there. School is over for the day and dinner is over. And most of them are being pretty good about wearing masks. Not all of them so good about social distancing, but it seems to be the new gathering place for a lot of these young people. And socialization seems to be just a huge part of the mental health equation. Or am I wrong about that?
You're absolutely right about that. And, you know, that socialization is probably one of the best things that they can do for themselves. And right now we have, you know, this kind of paradox where the health department and things are saying, you know, you need to social distance. And then for mental health, socialization is so important. So how do we bridge those two things as an ongoing conversation? And it really is something that we're talking a lot about in therapy for those kids that are calling in. How do we maintain meaningful relationships? How do we form those relationships all while protecting our health?
Yeah, such a tough part of the equation. Heather, the research is saying that we're seeing these difficulties develop at twice the rate of a similar study that was done just 2 years ago, of course, before the pandemic. But do you see this trend continuing until we have a vaccine or until life returns to normal, or is it something that won't reverse quickly?
What will happen in the future, I think that what we're focusing on right now is just an increase in people needing that level of mental health support, and people recognizing that, you know, their symptoms may have exacerbated or changed significantly, and that may continue. You know, a lot of people kind of braced themselves when everybody went into this COVID quarantine at home and safer at home and stay at home and all these kind of levels that we've gone through, and maybe thought, you know, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to be okay. And as people have recognized this is going on longer and longer, I think that we're seeing people be affected in different ways. And I think it's always important to check in and see where you're at. And if you're feeling like you need that support, you really need to reach out. There are so many people out there, whether that's formal mental health support at a place like Jefferson Center for Mental Health, or via, you know, traditional friendships and family supports. That connection, that social connection, is so very important.
Kiara, let me just run back to you. I'm just wondering if as a mental health professional, did you and your staff, did you see this coming like a freight train as it developed? Did you suspicion that we were going to be facing what is, I think, modestly referred to now as a mental health crisis in the country?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think, initially we saw people staying at home. They were taking the governor's advice, staying at home, really not reaching out for mental health or substance use services. So initially we saw a bit of a decrease in folks reaching out and wanting to access care. But we expected that once people settled in and got to the point where they couldn't sit at home anymore and really needed to connect, that we would see that increase, and we absolutely have. So people are reaching out now, which we're very happy about. It's incredibly important to reach out early on when you identify that you're needing help or support, or even if you don't know if you need help or support, but you just want to check in with someone. I think it's important to reach out early, and that prevents some of the more significant disruption that can happen later on.
I'll throw this to both you and Nick. There seems to be three main causes of all these mental difficulties. And I think we can all agree that losing a loved one is probably enough to make anyone feel some depression, as we mentioned earlier, Chiara. But the financial stress and the social isolation caused by the virus seem to pretty much top the list of difficulties for those that have not lost a loved one in the crisis. Which of those do you see as a primary driver of mental health difficulty?
Yeah, Mark, I think all of those are critical to mental health. What we know, though, is that social isolation either is a protective factor, and it really can allow us to have the support that we need when we're dealing with financial, crises, when we're dealing with more stress and anxiety, and it can when we don't have that social connection, it can lead to really significant impact on our ability to tolerate stressors. There's some really incredible research over the past decade on the importance of social connectedness and the detriment of social isolation. So people who are more socially isolated have a much greater risk of things like depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts and behaviors. But it also weakens your immune system and makes it much more difficult to fight off infection. People have increased risks of things like heart disease, dementia, early mortality are all very, very significantly related to social isolation. So I would say that social isolation is critical in what we're facing right now, and the importance of reaching out really cannot be understated.
I had no idea there were so many physical ramifications, but I can certainly see that. And I know that I'm of a certain age, I'm approaching 70, so I have a lot of friends that are in that age group that has seen a lot of death and a lot of illness from the virus. And I'm wondering, I also have 6 siblings of a certain age. I know a lot of people who are facing this. So I wonder, do you encounter a lot of people who have real fears about contracting the virus? And when you do, I'll ask you first, Nick, what do you say to them when you encounter these people who have this anxiety about the health aspects of this and what they might face?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really unique to the individual. And with Jefferson Center, a lot of our work really is tailored towards what the individual needs are. So to answer your question, we have kids that are now returning in-person learning. And if their kids come in contact with the virus and come home, what does that mean? For those with elderly parents or grandparents or guardians, what does that mean? How do we help them maintain a semblance of safety? So a lot of our work is talking with them about preventative measures that can be taken. It really does have a massive impact on mental health when those connections are more difficult to make. So I don't know if that answers it at all.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And I'm wondering, as a counselor, given the amount of death we have seen in the country and the fact that we don't have a vaccine yet, and a lot of people are still kind of looking at that horizon, how do you paint a picture of hope, or do you as a professional try to paint that picture?
Absolutely. Hope is really our currency within the counseling profession. There's hope for everyone. Chiara had mentioned a lot of side effects and things that can come with an experience that we're all going through right now. And there is hope, recognizing those warning signs, those changes in behavior, those uncomfortable feelings, and reaching out to someone for assistance is the first step. Sometimes, a lot of the research suggests that even making that call, the first call to the mental health center, has a huge impact on someone's mental health. It raises their hope because they're finally taking action on getting help. So that's the first step in anything.
I get it. So now I'm wondering, in terms of caseloads, are you hearing from more older Americans, or do you hear from more younger adults, or is it parents, or is it kids? I mean, can you tell me what the largest demographic is that you find yourself dealing with day to day?
Kiara's probably got the best info on that one. I deal with a lot of the families. I know that a lot of parents right now are struggling with the needs. Telehealth is not something anyone really was expecting, or education in that format. You know, Kiara mentioned there are some parents who are working that now have to work and take care of their child or monitor their school progress. And so a lot of parents are calling for assistance, but Kiara would have the better data on everything.
On demographics, is that something we can talk about, Kiara? What do you think?
Sure. I think we continue to see what we've seen before the pandemic, which is most of the calls that we receive are from adults between around age 24 up to about age 50 or 55. But we are seeing an increase in calls from parents of children. I would say that's the demographic that we're seeing an uptick in right now, related to all of the stressors that we've mentioned before around kids going back to school, working from home, remote learning, and dealing with the added challenges there. Certainly we hear from a lot of older adults as well, and we just encourage that we would love to hear from more older adults. I think that sometimes they may have less access to resources about what supports are available, and I think that it's really important that social connection and that request for support is available for older adults right now.
I agree. I know, for example, in my mother-in-law's case, in her early 90s, even before the coronavirus, she was feeling a lot of effects of the effects of isolation. And then after the pandemic began, a lot of these retirement communities and nursing homes and what have you were kind of at the nexus of this thing. And a lot of them pretty much just had to close their doors to protect their clientele. So I'm guessing that probably a lot of seniors who are at home trying to protect their health, trying to do all the right things, wear the mask, stay at home, maintain social distance. I know I see them all at the curbside grocery pickup on a regular basis, week to week. I would think it would be very important for them to reach out. And I'm wondering, do you think it's an easy thing for them to recognize that they need help, or is it something that maybe they need to be pushed to do or helped to do?
That's a great question, Mark. And I think everyone is different, certainly. But I would say that older adults, for the most part, tend to feel like they've lived this long, they've got it together, they can take care of themselves, and sometimes have less awareness of the options for support as well. So right now, I think that we can easily do phone calls with people at home. They don't have to mess with technology if they don't feel comfortable with that, although that's always an option. So we're trying to get creative about the ways that we outreach older adults who may not be as familiar with traditional ways to access care, whether it's coming into an office or doing a telehealth visit. I think that's really important to make that awareness present right now.
Heather, that was the next direction for me. So in addition to being surrounded by a lot of college kids, I'm also surrounded by a lot of families with younger kids who are maybe in school 2 or 3 days or not at all, but they're doing a lot of remote learning. And Kiara just alluded to the fact that there are a lot of parents really struggling with that. And I'm wondering if parents are suffering as much as the children. Do you think the children are kind of adapting, or do you think that kids and families are equal, or their parents are equally as stressed in those situations?
I think both parties have a great deal of challenge to face. You know, the parents are trying to get the kiddos connected, support them emotionally, physically, while also kind of becoming an expert in tech support, which may not have been their expertise to begin with, managing multiple kiddos or generations at home, while also often, kind of managing their jobs. So I think the parents seem to have a lot of challenges that they are
they're dealing with, but the kiddos too. You know, if you can't type, if you can't spell, and you're trying to navigate a technological educational environment, that's a huge challenge for kiddos. And so they just want to connect with their friends. They want to have fun at school. You know, they want to do the basics, and this is all new to everyone. So I think both parents and kiddos are really facing a lot of challenges that have not happened before. You know, I've got kids in the school systems, and they've figured out, well, wait a second, where are snow days going to go? Because I think that now that we've figured out how to do the remote learning, maybe those snow days never happen again, because no matter what's going on, we can connect educationally. And they're so happy to see their friends at the same time. You know, it's not in person. So everyone's really trying to adjust.
No question. So Nick, there's another question for you. I'm wondering, what's your best advice when a parent calls you and says, this is so difficult and it's not working on so many levels, and we're all full of anxiety about it. What do you say to parents who call you with that problem? And I'll bet you do hear from them.
We absolutely hear from them. The first thing is, you're not alone. This is something that is impacting nearly everybody at this point. And, you know, just the acknowledgement that there are additional responsibilities placed on parents right now is, I mean, it's unprecedented, like we've talked about. So you know, if we engage them in a counseling type engagement, we would talk with them about coping skills. How are they taking care of themselves through this? Because that's something, you know, that's part of the equation, I guess, that it gets missed a lot. A lot of the emphasis is on, how do I get my kid to school? How do I support them with school? And a lot of times that's at the expense of their own mental health. So talking with them about how they're staying afloat so that they can keep their family afloat as well.
Kiara, the Boston University study says that their survey shows that the problem for most adults, and I'll bet a lot of kids as well, was mostly angst rather than a full-blown psychiatric illness. Do you think that pretty much characterizes everybody, or is the problem elevating to something more than that?
I think it really depends, Mark, on the person again. So for many people who don't have a history of a mental health issue, who don't have a history of a substance use issue, this really is circumstantial. The times that we are in just will lead to an increase in angst, increased stress, increased anxiety, worry. All of those things are pretty normal responses to, as we've mentioned, unprecedented, unusual times. However, there are people who have histories of depression, who may have had depressive episodes in the past, who may have a predisposition to anxiety and some of those other mental health disorders. And for those individuals, this can be a really difficult time because it triggers a repetitive pattern for them. And it's really, really important in those cases to access help, to get treatment and support so that it doesn't become something more chronic.
Right. Heather, let me ask you, with your trauma background, as a parent or a grandparent, what are some signs I should be watching for that my young grandchildren, mine happen to be 13, 10, and 8, what are some signs that maybe I should be watching for that their level of angst and anxiety is increasing, or that they're struggling more than I might suspect?
I think knowing your kiddo and knowing what their baseline, what their norm is really important, because then if you're seeing significant changes, you can know that something might be up. You can also pay attention to any sort of developmental regression, meaning, you know, if they're a 10-year-old and they start acting more regularly like a 5-year-old would, right? And that's not just very briefly, but that is, you know, having a regression in a way that is not consistent with their age, right? A 15-year-old acting like a 10-year-old, a 10-year-old acting like a 5-year-old, bedwetting, sucking the thumb, kiddos being really clingy or extra irritable. So the developmental regression, as well as any significant changes, would be a really good sign that something might be up. And kiddos take their cues from their caregivers. And so, you know, if you're wanting to support those kids, then what you're wanting to do is make sure that you are staying calm and you're staying supportive and you are emphasizing safety and security and stability. Because again, the kiddos really look to their caregivers for cues about what to do in those situations.
That's very interesting. And Nick, I have, in addition to families with small children around me, I have teachers who are doing remote learning from their kitchens and their home offices. And universally, those parents and those teachers, as I have interviewed them and just talked to them, visited with them, they are all universally concerned that their kids aren't learning as much or doing as well as they would have had this have been a normal school year. So do you think that is in fact something that's occurring, or is that your guess? And is it something they quickly recover from?
That's a great question. Not my area of expertise. If I had to take a guess, that's probably pretty accurate. Again, with speaking to teachers, whole new set of responsibilities. Same for kids. So it's just a big change and stressor all around, and we're all trying to navigate it as a society and doing the best we possibly can. So.
Some helpline counselors have reported callers expressing concerns about interpersonal relationships due to the social distancing. We talked about this for kids, but not for adults. And I'm wondering, is it more of a problem for younger Americans? And I would just guess because they're so isolated that college is such a social thing, that might be true. But is it also a problem for older adults? Just the general isolation. And I know probably for seniors, it is especially a problem. In fact, I've seen that. But I'm wondering if for maybe younger adults, adults with families, adults who have maybe some very close friends, adults I know in my neighborhood who were part of bike clubs and hiking clubs, all of that has gone away. I'm wondering, Chiara or whoever, whichever one of you feels most qualified to answer, because I'm kind of guessing sometimes that your fields of expertise. Do you think that probably younger adults might be experiencing that same kind of social isolation and angst and regret as a result?
As I mentioned earlier, social isolation is incredibly detrimental to our mental and physical well-being. And during a time, as we're in now with the pandemic, when we need to be as mentally and physically resilient as we possibly can, we are on orders to socially distance and let go of some of those connections. So Mark, social connection is important for everyone from zero to the end of life. And there certainly are certain stages of life where that social connection is critical to development of someone's identity. So certain milestones in childhood, certainly teenagers and adolescents is perhaps one of the most critical times in a person's life to build those social connections, which really allow you to form your sense of yourself. And so without some of those, particularly for extended periods of time, that can be very challenging for late adolescence and early adulthood. So I would say that those are significant time periods, but for all of us, social connection is critical.
Right. Who would have guessed that is such a big player in all of this? I mean, it would have been one of those things that I certainly wouldn't have guessed. So especially for these adolescents that you just spoke of, is this something that they recover for? Again, is this going to be an ongoing problem for them for many years, or do you think we see a rapid recovery as we get back to life after a vaccine?
I really believe, we really believe that we are all resilient as human beings. We have a capacity to undergo extreme stress and challenges in our lives and as communities. And there is essentially nothing that human beings can't recover from. I would say what's important to acknowledge here is to reach out for support, talk to people about what you're experiencing, talk to your family members, even if that's by phone or a video chat or with a mask on, or at the park, wherever you can connect, and know that for most of us, we're experiencing normal reactions to abnormal situations, and we will move through this period of time.
That's very hopeful and forward-looking. And the Boston University study also talked about triggers that people should be aware of. Can you talk? I mean, we talked about parents just need to know their kiddos and and actually in your own children is kind of an easy thing to see, but as a mental health professional, are there triggers in all of this that you're looking for in people as you have discussions with them?
Triggers are very personal for each individual. So that could be watching too much news. That could be, people emphasizing their belief system around COVID and who gets it and who doesn't. And so because the triggers are so personal, it could be a lot of different things. It could be social media. It could be somebody's previous trauma experience that their current experience is making them feel physically similar to how they felt in their trauma experience. And I think it's just important to know what those triggers are, or recognize it when you're reacting negatively or in a really highly anxious way to something that's happened to you, and that your reaction is almost disproportionate to what's happening in the moment. That's a really good cue that something deeper could be going on, and you might need a higher level of mental health support.
And Heather, that brings up an interesting point. So we've talked to a lot of parents, almost 800 of them, in fact, when this topic came up. And it was just one of those things that these were mostly parents. So these were people, say, 18 to 49, 18 to 59, young parents, middle-aged parents, parents worried about their parents and parents worried about their children. And I actually have a question here from a mom who said, if you talk to these people, can you ask one of them, should I be telling my children that they have to stay off social media until we get it is such a big player in all of their lives. And they're wondering, is it one of those things that is wise to restrict, or given the fact that they're already so isolated, is it one of those things that you just kind of walk on by? The parent wanted to know, do I restrict social media for my, I don't know, Nick, is that a question for you, or Heather, whoever wants to take that?
I'm happy to talk to that. Nick, you might have some ideas too. Maybe we can both address it, but I think that social media plays a really important part in a lot of people's lives, especially adolescents. And so in this time of living in a pandemic, it's important to stay socially connected. And social media might play a piece of that, but it can't play the only piece. And I would say that you might consider restricting social media when there are negative reactions to the social media, right? So if social media engagement is increasing your anxiety, that would be a really good clue to consider restricting that and to step away. You know, you can remain connected to other people in other ways. There's telephone, there's video chat, there's FaceTime, right? It's not only social media. You can, if you are so inclined, get together in person with physical distancing and masks in safe ways. There are definitely other ways to connect with other humans and get that sense of support. And it doesn't only have to be on social media.
Nick, let me get your thoughts on that as well.
I share the same thoughts with Heather. I think social media does play an important part, and there are some inherent risks with it. So as a parent, if you monitor your child's social media use and you're seeing the negative or detrimental effects, then it might be time to limit it. And if you're not seeing those effects, it might be best to allow those connections to persist.
Nick, do you feel the same about watching the news? Is that another one of those things that you might monitor or restrict, said the journalist?
Certainly. I think the same kind of rule of thumb holds. So if viewing media on a consistent basis is having a detrimental effect, it might be best to take a break from it. If you're able to view it and not see any ill effects, then by all means continue. We were talking about the triggers before, and I think it's worth noting that sometimes people just feel uncomfortable and they don't know why. And that's a great opportunity to call Jefferson Center or your community mental health agency and talk with someone, because that's part of our job, is to help identify what those what those reasons are as to why we're feeling how we are, so that we can accurately identify it and help with it.
Right. They feel uncomfortable and they don't know why. That could be a central theme. That should be the new title of the program. And that was the that was one of the primary comments we got from a lot of the study group, is that they just, not only that they're uncomfortable and they don't know why, but they don't know what to do. And, which brings me to this question. According to the Boston University study, Kiara, there is a general consensus in the mental health field that you need more people trained in trauma, like Heather and Nick. And I'm wondering, is that the kind of therapy that you're most needing to employ with callers right now?
That's a great question, and certainly we need more behavioral health professionals across the board. So we know that there are not enough folks trained in behavioral health, enough clinicians to support the need. And trauma, experience in trauma therapy is a critical piece of that. I think what people are needing right now is again, it's across the board and it's very unique to the individual. So some people might just need some cognitive behavioral therapy, a bit of coping skill development. Families and children might need a bit more around how parents and children interact with each other, as well as social emotional learning and supports. Certainly people with trauma histories during this time, as Heather mentioned earlier, it can trigger past traumatic events, certainly feelings of being out of control and not having a lot to grasp onto right now. And so trauma therapy is really critical there. During this time, I think, speaking of feeling out of control, the lack of control is really one of the foundational elements of an experience of trauma. And I think we all feel a bit out of control right now. A lot's unpredictable, a lot is out of our hands. And so that sense of not having control can have a significant impact on trauma for all of us.
Yeah, I agree. Not being able to steer any of this is just so unsettling. So here's my last question. And Heather, I'll start with you and we'll finish with Kiara. We would like to know how you as mental health professionals are dealing with this load. I always wonder about how people who are just listening to other people and all of their difficulty and problems, I always wonder how they navigate that. So I'm wondering, Heather, how you are coping in your job and in this crisis.
I think that we are no strangers to providing hope amidst challenge. This is just a new challenge and a different time. And so this is what we do. This is our chosen profession, and we do it because we're passionate about supporting others. It's really important to take care of yourself. I myself use a lot of outdoor time and exercise and reading and spending time with my family, and that really allows me to recharge in a way that I can continue to help support other people. But I think as a profession, mental health providers are really passionate about providing hope when it is difficult and when people are facing these challenges.
I'm amazed. I'm just amazed at that. Nick, you're like your colleagues. You're a pretty upbeat guy. You seem pretty grounded. But I'm wondering, at the end of the day, do you just want to go sit in a dark room for a while?
I have some dark rooms that I could go sit in. I prefer to stay in the light, though. A lot of the support, really, I think Jefferson Center and, across different professions, if you think of teachers, there's a culture of support amongst them. And Jefferson Center is no different in that way. We have a fantastic, amazing staff all across Jefferson Center. And it's fantastic because I can call literally anyone for support at any time. And I think that's one of the big things that helps me get through this. I have an inherent support network kind of built into my job. Some don't have that. And they're going to have to find alternate means to do that. For me, I go play sports and, just spend as much time outside as possible. And that's what gets me through.
Yeah, like Heather, you get outside. Yeah, I've always wondered this, Kiara. I mean, who's taking care of the mental health professionals who are taking care of us? Your people seem to have found a solution.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark, for asking this question. I think as people in the helping profession, we do cling to the ability to be resilient, to find hope. But it's also important to acknowledge that we're also human beings and that this is a challenging time for myself, for my colleagues on the phone, and for all behavioral health professionals and other helping professions right now. The most important thing I think that we can do for ourselves, and certainly that I try to do for myself, is just acknowledge if I'm having a bad day or a bad moment, and also accepting that that moment will pass. So not allowing sort of us to stay in those down moments, but really finding a mindfulness moment to moment. Mindfulness and acceptance are skills that as behavioral health professionals, we often work with our clients around. And it's so important that we're applying those for ourselves right now. Being in the present moment, doing what we can to impact positive change, taking care of ourselves in the moment that we need to take care of ourselves, and knowing that this too shall pass.
Yes, well, that's a wonderful message to end our program with, that this too shall pass. There is light at the end of the tunnel. It's just still a little hard for everybody to see. And I so appreciate the three of you and the time that you gave us today. I know how busy you are, but we just thought it was very important for people to know that there is help out there. It seems like a lot of people are finding you, but I'm guessing there's probably a lot more who could use your assistance, and people would then be able to discover their mindfulness, find a little hope, and relieve some of their angst and anxiety. So Heather, Trish, thank you. We hope to see you again. Maybe when this is all over, we'll circle back and get to see your face again. Nick Buckholtz, thank you. And Dr. Kiara Kunzler, I thank you all for your time today. Thank you for being part of our broadcast, and thank you all for the wonderful help and assistance that you are lending to your community. So go out there and have a hopeful, mindful day. That's my non-professional advice. Thanks to you all, and thanks to all of you for joining us and being part of the conversation.